Well, welcome to the OldProf-Genetics YouTube channel. I thought I'd just take a few moments to talk a little bit about what this channel's intended to have and what you'll be seeing. So obviously this is a genetics channel, and what it's basically made up of are a series of lectures from two courses that I've taught over the years. One would be labeled as GG, which stands for General Genetics, and then there'll be a more advanced course outlines called Human Genetics. General genetics is really an introductory course, a survey course, and it's what we would call a step-up course. It is intended to be the sort of the first course after you've taken your general biology series, at least in the US, and it is taking those ideas and all the terminology that you learned there that are related to genetics and then expanding on them. And then also, of course, adding new material, new information. It is a survey course, so you'll see that the lectures are kind of broad. Some are not very deep, some are. It just depends on the subject matter. Those areas that are specifically related to genetics, we will go into in more detail. Other things that expand across into cell biology, other places, we'll probably skim over just with the idea of trying to understand how they relate into the genetic system. So it is a survey course, so some parts are in depth and some parts are a little bit less in depth. Now, the way we work in thinking about these is that they have gone from this idea of pedagogy, which is teacher-centered systems, and we are trying to work people toward andragogy, which is adult learning. And a colleague and I have come up with a term to talk about this, which really applies to university level courses, called shulagogy. And it's just to give it a name, but this is sort of a way of encompassing all the approaches that are used from taking people from having someone lecture to them toward being able to be a lifelong learner and to learn most of the information for yourself. And it includes all the different modalities that might be applied, such as flipped classrooms or active learning or lecturing, etc. So really what we're doing here is in general genetics is sort of on the low end of this, and then on the next course will be more toward the andragogy. People will be doing more of their own. Right. Well, what are the topic areas that you'll see in the general genetics course? And there are four. First is transmission genetics. Transmission genetics is really classical genetics for the most part. This is where you talk about Mendelian process, ratios, and things we call modes of inheritance. So you're certainly aware of dominant recessive modes where one allele is dominant over another, but there are many, many different modes, some being very complex. We'll talk about epistasis, we'll talk about multiple alleles, we'll talk about sex genetics such as sex influence, sex limited, sex linked, and we'll talk about all sorts of other forms of modes of inheritance. So this is where, in ratios and how to test for those ratios in progeny, this is where this come out. Then there's a section called cytological genetics. This is the study of chromosomes and chromosome structure, particularly with the importance of variation in chromosome structure. What happens if you have 3 sets of chromosomes in a cell instead of just 2? What happens if you have 3 chromosomes at a particular site instead of the normal 2 for that one site? And we'll use some examples from both agriculture as well as human systems. Then we get into the broad area of molecular genetics. This is, obviously the modern broad area where DNA sequencing is done, genome sequencing, looking for all these. Much of this will be, so again, survey. So we'll almost cartoon things like transcription, translation, these things, because we're really just interested in how, getting from the DNA, from the genetic material to the way the phenotype looks. And other courses will take over how this is actually done in great detail, molecular genetics, cell biology, etc. Other things will go into quite a bit of detail. We will bring new topics in, such as epigenetics. We'll talk about gene regulation and some of those areas. And then finally, the last area that you'll see lectures loaded up onto here is in population genetics. This is where we talk about groups of individuals and what happens when we're not just concerned with one type of mating, but we're concerned for all possible types of matings in groups. And there's been over 100 years worth of theory and ideas put into this area. This is where conservation genetics comes in. It's where population is, things like genetic counseling, those sorts of things come in. So we'll close up this part of general genetics with that discussion. And then human genetics, we have a whole series of areas we'll talk about. Obviously, cover a little bit of history of human genetics, some of the techniques that are involved to generate data, a lot of discussion about genetic diseases, chromosomal based and other genetic diseases, legal issues that are out there, what happens and how do you handle them, talk about different DNA repositories and how those are used, talk about training that's required for people that are doing these sorts of studies with humans and how you store human data and how you analyze it. And then we also cover things like human migrations, both ancestral migrations as well as more modern ones, such as the great migrations of the 20th century in the United States. Well, also within their migrations, we'll talk things about the history of Neanderthal and Denisonian relationships. And so these are basically the subjects that are here. From time to time, we'll be adding additional material as we move forward, but these are the primary parts that you'll expect to see lectures on for right now.